Then the murmur of the approaching weir began to hold the air, and they felt a consciousness that they were nearing the end, whatever it might be that surely awaited their expedition. A wide half-circle of foam and glinting lights and shining shoulders of green water, the great weir closed the backwater from bank to bank, troubled all the quiet surface with twirling eddies and floating foam streaks, and deadened all other sounds with its solemn and soothing grumble. In midmost of the stream, embraced in the weir's shimmering arm spread, a small island lay anchored, fringed close with willow and silver birch and alder. Reserved, shy, but full of significance, it hid whatever it might hold behind a veil, keeping it till the hour should come, and with the hour those who were called and chosen. Slowly, but with no doubt or hesitation whatever, and in something of a solemn expectancy, the two animals passed through the broken, tumultuous water and moored their boat at the flowery margin of the island. In silence they landed and pushed through the blossom and scented herbage undergrowth that led up to the level ground, till they stood on a little lawn of marvellous green, set round with nature's own orchard trees, crabapple, wild cherry and sloe. "This is the place of my song dream, the place the music played to me," whispered the rat, as if in a trance. "Here in this holy place, here if anywhere, surely we shall find him." Then suddenly the mole felt a great awe fall upon him, an awe that turned his muscles to water, bowed his head and rooted his feet to the ground. It was no panic terror, indeed he felt wonderfully at peace and happy. But it was an awe that smote him and held him, and without seeing, he knew it could only mean that some august presence was very, very near. With difficulty he turned to look for his friend, and saw him at his side, cowed, stricken, and trembling violently. And still there was utter silence in the populous bird-haunted branches around them, and still the light grew and grew. Perhaps he would never have dared to raise his eyes, but that, though the piping was now hushed, and the call and the summons seemed still dominant and imperious, he might not refuse were death himself waiting to strike him instantly, once he had looked with mortal eye on things rightly kept hidden. Trembling he obeyed, and raised his humble head, and then in that utter clearness of the imminent dawn, while nature, flushed with fullness of incredible colour, seemed to hold her breath for the event, he looked in the very eyes of the friend and helper, saw the backward sweep of the curved horns gleaming in the growing daylight, saw the stern, hooked nose between the kindly eyes that were looking down on them humorously, while the bearded mouth broke into a half-smile at the corners, saw the rippling muscles on the arm that lay across the broad chest, the long, supple hand still holding the panpipes only just fallen away from the parted lips, saw the splendid curves of the shaggy limbs disposed in majestic ease on the sward, saw last of all, nestling between his very hoofs, sleeping soundly in entire peace and contentment, the little round, podgy, childish form of the baby otter. All this he saw for one moment, breathless and intense, vivid on the morning sky, and still as he looked, he lived, and still as he lived, he wondered. "Rat," he found breath to whisper, shaking, "are you afraid?" "Afraid," murmured the rat, his eyes shining with unutterable love. "Afraid of him? Oh, never, never, and yet, oh, Mole, I am afraid." Then the two animals, crouching on the earth, bowed their heads and did worship. Sudden and magnificent, the sun's broad golden disk showed itself over the horizon facing them, and the first rays shooting across the level water meadows took the animals full in the eyes and dazzled them. When they were able to look once more, the vision had vanished, and the air was full of the carol of birds that hailed the dawn. As they stared blankly and dumb, misery deepening as they slowly realised all they had seen and all they had lost, a capricious little breeze dancing up from the surface of the water tossed the aspens, shook the dewy roses, and blew lightly and caressingly in their faces. And with its soft touch came instant oblivion. For this is the very best gift that the kindly demigod is careful to bestow upon those to whom he has revealed himself in their helping, the gift of forgetfulness, lest the awful remembrance should remain and grow and overshadow mirth and pleasure, and the great haunting memory should spoil all the afterlives of little animals helped out in difficulties, in order that they should be happy and light-hearted as before. Mole rubbed his eyes and stared at Rat, who was looking about him in a puzzled sort of way. "I beg your pardon, what did you say, Rat?" he asked. "I think I was only remarking," said Rat slowly, "that this was the right sort of place, and that here, if anywhere, we should find him. And look, why, there he is, the little fellow." And with a cry of delight he ran towards the slumbering Portly. But Mole stood still a moment, held in thought, as one wakens suddenly from a beautiful dream who struggles to recall it, and can recapture nothing but a dim sense of the beauty of it, the beauty, till that too fades away in its turn, and the dreamer bitterly accepts the hard, cold waking and all its penalties. So Mole, after struggling with his memory for a brief space, shook his head sadly and followed the Rat. Portly woke up with a joyous squeak and wriggled with pleasure at the sight of his father's friends who had played with him so often in past days. In a moment, however, his face grew blank, and he fell to hunting round in a circle with a pleading whine. As a child that has fallen happily asleep in its nurse's arms and wakes to find itself alone and laid in a strange place, and searches corners and cupboards and runs from room to room, despair growing silently in its heart. Even so, Portly searched the island and searched, dogged and unwearingly, till at last the black moment came for giving it up and sitting down and crying bitterly. The Mole ran quickly to comfort the little animal, but Rat, lingering, looked long and doubtfully at certain hoof marks deep in the sward. "Some great animal has been here," he murmured slowly and thoughtfully, and stood musing, his mind strangely stirred. "Come along, Rat," called the Mole. "Think of poor Otter waiting up there by the ford." Portly had soon been comforted by the promise of a treat, a jaunt on the river in Mr. Rat's real boat. And the two animals conducted him to the water's side, placed him securely between them in the bottom of the boat, and paddled off down the backwater. The sun was fully up by now, and hot on them. Birds sang lustily and without restraint, and flowers smiled and nodded from either bank, but somehow, so thought the animals, with less of richness and blaze of colour than they seemed to remember seeing quite recently somewhere. They wondered where. The main river reached again, they turned the boat's head upstream, towards the point where they knew their friend was keeping his lonely vigil. As they drew near the familiar ford, the Mole took the boat into the bank, and they lifted Portly out and set him on his legs on the towpath, gave him his marching orders and a friendly farewell, pat on the back, and shoved out into midstream. They watched the little animal as he waddled along the path contentedly and with importance. Watched him till they saw his muzzle suddenly lift and his waddle break into a clumsy amble as he quickened his pace with shrill whines and wriggles of recognition. Looking up the river, they could see Otter start up, tense and rigid, from out of the shallows where he crouched in dumb patience, and could hear his amazed and joyous bark as he bounded up through the osiers onto the path. Then the Mole, with a strong pull on one oar, swung the boat round and let the full stream bear them down again whither it would, their quest now happily ended. I feel strangely tired, Rat, said the Mole, leaning wearily over his oars as the boat drifted. It's being up all night, you'll say, perhaps, but that's nothing. We do as much half the nights of the week at this time of the year. No, I feel as if I had been through something very exciting and rather terrible, and it was just over, and yet nothing particular has happened.